All right, we're going to get started. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Danny Purvis. I am a longtime volunteer and a board member for Wild Cumberland.
And I'm Jessica Howell Edwards, the executive director. We are a small, tiny grassroots organization, and we appreciate, out of all the priorities you have in your life, the fact that you've taken time to be here with us tonight. So hopefully things are going to move smoothly for us. But with that being said, Danny, do you want to?
Yeah. I also would like to briefly introduce Kelly Cox from the Defenders of Wildlife. Kelly is the Senior Policy and Planning Specialist for the National Wildlife Refuges and Parks Program. She'll be presenting a little bit later in the presentation, so you'll be hearing from her soon. And we have also invited a number of elected officials and members of their staff to join us. And we want to take a moment to acknowledge if any elected officials or staff members are currently on the call. So if you are one of the elected officials or staff members we've invited, please, if you'd like to take yourself off mute and briefly introduce yourself and maybe say a few brief words. Okay, I'm going to take it from the silence that they have not joined, but we will go ahead and move forward. We also wanted to take a moment to acknowledge all of the partner organizations that we've been working with over the last many months, really years. And they have contributed some really excellent expertise in helping us analyze the land exchange and other plans that the National Park Service has proposed. We are united on promoting transparency, public engagement, and ensuring that the park is managed in alignment with its legislative intent. And so we really appreciate everybody's contributions to this work. So I'm going to just really quickly give you a run of show here, just to acknowledge that we are recording this presentation, and we will be sharing a copy of the recording following the presentation that you can take a look at your leisure. So today we're going to give you a quick definition of some common terms that you'll hear related to the land exchange and talk about the Park Service's stated purpose of plan for the land exchange. Then we'll review each of the 4 land exchanges that have been proposed and give you a sense of where those are occurring across the island and some helpful context. And then we'll turn it over to Kelly from Defenders of Wildlife to talk about some results of a FOIA request and present a public versus private timeline to give you a sense of all of the work that's been going into the land exchange and some of our remaining unanswered questions about the exchange. And then we will finish off by talking about our own FOIA request that we submitted and to give you a little bit of context about how the land exchange fits in with other proposed plans on the island. And finally, of course, we'll give you a nice, clear next steps and how you can engage with this issue and advocate for the island. And then half of the presentation or half of our town hall time together will be an opportunity to ask questions, express concerns. And this is really aimed at a public forum. So we definitely encourage you to submit questions throughout the presentation and hold your questions to the end. All right, so first we're going to define a public land exchange for you. Many of you joined us about 2 years ago when the land exchange was first proposed. And so this should be pretty familiar to you. But a public land exchange is a transaction that would transfer public lands from one owner to another. And that's typically an exchange between a public land management agency and a private owner. And that sometimes is an equal exchange and sometimes involves financial payment to equalize the value of the trade. retained right. In this case, at Cumberland Island, these are the owners that receive payment for their property and transfer title to the federal government, but then they can remain, and in this case, on Cumberland Island and occupy it under specific agreements for a defined period of time. And this, in this context, is really specific to when they established the National Seashore and worked with the private landowners to eventually transfer that land over. And then fee simple is standard property ownership. Wilderness, 56% of the island is designated wilderness or potential wilderness, and a wilderness area, capital W wilderness, is officially designated through congressional action and ultimately assigned by the president. And wilderness is afforded the highest level of land protection. Potential wilderness is similar to wilderness, but it is, and it's managed the same as wilderness. It's intended to become wilderness, but it hasn't been because of what's called non-conforming uses. And so because of those temporary conditions, it has not fully been designated as wilderness, and eventually it will be, so it's managed as such.
Thanks. That's a lot of definitions, but we did want to sort of level set because some of these terms are specific to the discussion we're going to have tonight. So I think it is probably helpful to reorient ourselves. Thanks, Danny.
Yep. And another quick orientation before we jump into the land exchange is that the Cumberland Island National Seashore was designated in 1972, and it's kind of a unique national seashore because, as you'll see in the bottom line here, it was meant to be preserved in its primitive state. And while there are some alternative uses such as recreation that are allowed at this national seashore, primarily it's meant to stay wild and primitive. So in September 2024, the National Park Service had proposed this land exchange under the premise that they were exchanging property with private landowners to relocate private interests to other areas where they say it's more appropriate and less impactful on visitors. So primarily the guiding principles of this were to establish continuity and connectivity of the park, to safeguard critical habitat for imperiled species, facilitate additional designation of wilderness, and then prevent and limit private development near culturally or ecologically significant areas. So we're going to go through each of the exchanges separately and then kind of pull it all together for you to get a sense of where all of these things are occurring on the island and then next to each other, relative to each other.
And just as a reminder, the information we're going to go through pretty quickly right now is what the agency publicly provided in 2024. We'll get into what the FOIA turned up in its documents a little further in the presentation. But again, as a reminder for everybody, this is what the National Park Service shared with the public and our attempt to make sense of it at that time.
Yeah. So just to give you an orientation, this parcel at the top of the map here is currently private. We understand it as actually being designated as potential wilderness under the Nancy Kopp Wilderness Trust. In this acquisition, it would become public land. And all of this area, this kind of gray demarcation is the wilderness area. So this is kind of directly south of Plum Orchard Mansion and that area. And so all of the land surrounding this parcel is currently wilderness.
And that pink area you see on your screen, and will for the next few slides, is a little misleading. The pink area, because you may not be able to see the key very clearly, is specifically calling out the historic district. So sort of consider that when you look here, because I think everybody sort of naturally looks at that pink parcel and thinks we're talking about that, but it's actually those smaller black and white parcels that you see in the image there.
Right. And this parcel down at the bottom of the map here is currently public, and it will become private. And so, one second.
Okay, you got your headphone?
Sorry, we're having a little bit of feedback issues on our end, and we apologize for this. Part of our technical difficulties is inevitable when you have a big webinar. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this parcel on the bottom of the map here is currently public land, and it will become privately owned. And this area has access to the marsh side. It has a dock, utility lines, water lines run through it, and an access road. This is on Old House Road, and it's bordered by federally designated potential wilderness. And we'll show you a map with all of these things together so you can see how this is adjacent to two other properties.
We can't hear you. I believe you're muted.
We understand where people lost us and where we started back. So if everybody could give me a thumbs up, do we need to start at the beginning of this slide real quickly?
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. All right, so the parcels at the top of the map here, these striped parcels, these are currently privately owned and they'll become public. These are both located on Stafford Beach. They also include culturally relevant sites. So this image here on the right side of the slide is the Stafford Chimneys. And currently it's not accessible to the public. It has recently been stabilized and reinforced by the Park Service. And so this would become publicly available. And that's approximately 132 acres of land that would be conveyed to the Park Service. This large parcel here, also on Old House Road, is currently public. It would become privately owned. And this also, just like the last parcel that we looked at, has water access, a dock, utility and water line, access roads. It's also bordered by federally designated wilderness. So the third land exchange they're proposing is going to be these two here. So this striped parcel right now is currently private and would become public. If you've ever hiked a parallel trail and you've gone through sort of the patchwork of public to private to public land to private land, that's what this is right here. And this is between Great Beach Road and another trail. And that's approximately 136 acres. And in exchange, just south of Old House Road is currently public land that would become private, and that's known as Davisville. This is a space that houses NPS staff and volunteers, and it's bordered by federally designated potential wilderness. And then the final exchange is, let me move that. Okay. all the way at the north end of the National Seashore is High Point. And I'll start there. So this is within a historic district where the First African Baptist Church is. It is currently public and would become private land according to the public documents that the Park Service has provided. And then in exchange, we would be acquiring a parcel of land that is adjacent to Sea Camp Ranger Station. It's currently the Lumar property. There was extensive litigation on this property related to the construction of a dock, which has been constructed and
remains
today. So we're going to give you a quick orientation to both of these maps. This is what all of the 4 land exchanges look like. And this is an approximate rendering based on the maps that the National Park Service provided for the public. So all of the green parcels, if you look at the map to the left, all of the green parcels would become public land, currently private, and all of the red parcels are currently public and would become private. So green meaning you'll be able to go to these, red meaning you will not be able to go to these.
I see what you did there.
Yeah. And we really wanted to zoom into this section in the center here where most of the parcels of the land exchange occur next to each other, adjacent to each other. The wilderness boundary is approximately right here, the southern boundary. And this area between Sea Camp and Stafford has very high visitor use concentration. So in particular, we want to point out here that there's a large concentration of what would become a private corridor that extends from the main road west to the marsh. And this bare area right here on the map, just to orient you, is the Stafford airstrip. It's not used by the public. It's just for the private residents. All of this area would be private. And then this area right here for your orientation is Brayfield Inn.
That's very helpful.
Okay, and I'm going to pass it over to Kelly now.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you, Jessica. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kelly Cox. I am a senior policy and planning specialist with Defenders of Wildlife. And if you're not familiar with us, we are a national nonprofit organization. We were founded in 1947, and we're dedicated to protecting and restoring America's wildlife and the habitat on which they rely. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you all this evening. As you've heard, Defenders of Wildlife submitted a Freedom of Information Act request earlier this year in March, seeking records related to this land exchange that Danny and Jessica so eloquently outlined for you. And what we received shed some important light on how these exchanges have progressed in the past few years, really the past 18 months or so, and what's been going on behind the scenes. And frankly, it raises some significant questions for us about transparency and public involvement. So tonight I'll do my very best to walk you through what the FOIA documents have revealed and what we believe they tell us about the proposed exchanges and what that could mean for our lovely little island. So let's go to the next slide. Great, thank you. So let's start with what the public knew. As you've heard from Danny and Jess, in September 2024, the Park Service launched this, what they called a pre-NEPA civic engagement process. So at that time, the land exchanges were in a very nascent stage. They were in development and they were soliciting public feedback about these potential land exchanges. And what Danny just presented to you was what we knew at the time. And after that point, there was very little public communication for about 18 months or maybe even more. And up until March 2026, we heard basically radio silence from the park. And that's not to say that we didn't receive communication from the park about other things, right? We heard from the park about the proposed visitor use management plan, among other issues going on at the seashore. But really, the first public indication that the land exchanges were moving came not actually from the National Park Service, but from the Camden County Commission. And maybe some of you were tuned into this issue when it arose, but in March 2026, there was a publicly noticed Camden County Commission meeting, and that was because the National Park Service submitted a request to the Camden County Commission asking for a letter of support from the commission to solicit funds from what a federal pot of funding called the Land and Water Conservation Fund related to these exchanges. So again, this was the first time that we had heard anything about the exchanges since 2024. And we had basically 7 days and frankly, a little bit less to rally and prepare for that Camden County Commission meeting. And to say it was a fire drill would be an understatement. But thankfully, the commissioners were extremely responsive to our requests to pump the brakes on this, and they voted no to that letter of support, which is a prerequisite for the National Park Service to receive funding, or actually to solicit funding from that pot of federal money. And they agreed that it was, in fact, premature. We didn't have enough information about the land exchanges to move forward with that funding request at that time. So that gave us a little bit of breathing room, but it was concerning because as you'll see on my next slide, the Park Service had already secured a letter of support from the governor's office to that end. So shortly thereafter, Defenders of Wildlife submitted a FOIA request endeavoring to determine exactly what the land exchange proposals entailed, because the superintendent did present before the Camden County Commission, but the level of detail was still missing. So let's move to the next slide, please. So this is the private timeline, and this is what we found from our FOIA request. And what we found tells a really different story from the public timeline. While the public was hearing radio silence over that 18-month plus period of time from September 2024 to March 2026, the draft agreements were moving forward. The deeds were moving forward. Everything was being developed behind the scenes. Proposed exchange documents were being transmitted to the landowners. Preliminary agreements were being signed. Additional executed documents were being exchanged with the Park Service. There was flurries of emails going back and forth. And as I mentioned, by early 2026, the Park Service had also sought a letter of support from the governor's office to seek funding for moving the land exchanges forward. So what I want really you all to take away from this is that there was a lot of substantial planning activity that was occurring behind the scenes outside of public view, while the public process remained largely dormant. So let's move to the next slide, please. And perhaps the most significant takeaway I can share with you from these documents is what the exchanges would allow. Now, I want to add a caveat here that when we submitted our FOIA request, we only received responsive documents for 2 out of the 4 exchanges that Danny and Jess presented to you tonight. So this is just based on a part of the universe that we know, right? But what I can share with you, and from what we can tell so far and with confidence, is that these exchanges would transfer federally owned land and publicly owned land into private ownership. And the draft deed restrictions, as they stand in the documents that we've seen, would allow residential development that fundamentally does not exist today. And explicitly, the documents do reference homes of at least 15,000 square feet, up to 35 feet tall, which could be 3 stories high. And across the 2 exchanges that we're talking about, exchange 1 and
they should just take it all in eminent domain. Yeah, I'd like to see who's putting it in.
I'm so sorry. If everybody could go ahead and mute, that would be great. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you. We're having some feedback. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So as I was saying, across the 2 exchanges, we could see up to 8 new residences in total at the seashore. So what are the nuts and bolts of this? From what we could tell, and again, this is subject to change. There's a lot of caveats here. And in fact, some of the agreements even say this is all subject to change up until the time of closing. For Exchange 1, the McFadden Exchange, they would transfer 20 acres of federal land into private ownership in exchange for 10 private acres. Whereas the Foster Exchange, Exchange 2, would transfer 60 acres of federal land to private ownership for 122 acres. Now, again, I want to add a caveat here. Defenders of Wildlife did a GIS analysis based off of the FOIA documents and the maps that were included. The actual legal descriptions are not included in the FOIA documents that we received. So there's been some other reports saying that 122 private acres is actually 90 acres. We simply don't know what the acreage is. And I think that's a fundamental issue, right? We don't know the details. And there's an issue there with transparency. So all that to say is, regardless of where you stand on the exchanges themselves, factually, these documents make very clear one thing, which is that the proposal is not just about rearranging property lines, right? It is going to fundamentally create new opportunities for private residential development at a significant scale and a large footprint within a national seashore that does not exist today. Let's go to the next slide, please. And as I mentioned, we have significant major questions that remain unanswered. For example, the exact boundaries remain undefined of these land exchanges. The surveys and the acreage calculations are still being negotiated. The final legal descriptions have not yet been completed. The appraisals haven't been finalized. The public still hasn't seen final parcel configurations or a final maps. And as I mentioned, we only have records for 2 of the 4 proposed exchanges. Not the least of which is that the public just simply hasn't had a meaningful opportunity to review this information. And absent defenders of wildlife receiving these documents in a timely manner, we wouldn't even be having this conversation right now. Who knows when you all would be aware of this information? In all likelihood, probably not until later this fall, when the superintendent has said an environmental review may occur, which is, in our view, several years down the line, right? So all that to say is we feel very strongly that the public has not been kept informed. Environmental reviews have not occurred. And it is critical that before irreversible decisions are made at this seashore, the public deserves to know exactly what land is being exchanged, what development could occur, and what impacts those decisions may have. So let's go to the next slide. So in conclusion, why does this matter? I think you all know why this matters. This is why you're here tonight. Cumberland Island is such a unique place. It is one of the last largely undeveloped barrier islands on the Atlantic coast. Of course, it contains nationally significant wildlife habitat, federally designated wilderness. It has robust habitat for nesting sea turtles and shorebirds, these beautiful maritime forests and coastal wetlands that we all love. And of course it matters because this is a permanent decision. And I can tell you that as somebody who works across the country on parks and refuges all across America, once federal land is transferred out of public ownership, it is difficult or impossible to recover. And so we have to be extremely thoughtful when we make these types of decisions. And to add insult to injury, I'll just top it off with one additional thing, which is that as all of this is happening, several major management issues remain unresolved at Cumberland, which hopefully you all are aware of. That means wilderness planning has remained unresolved, feral horse management unresolved, visitor use planning unresolved. There are a lot of questions about this island's future. And, I talked earlier this week with National Parks Traveler about this issue, and I described it as a cocktail of issues going on at Cumberland Island. And I think that's actually incorrect. I think that Cumberland Island is facing kind of death by a thousand cuts here, and we need to be extremely mindful of how we are approaching this patchwork of solutions to problems on this extremely sensitive barrier island. So all that to say is whatever the ultimate outcome is here, I feel very strongly, and I know Defenders of Wildlife does too, and so does Wild Cumberland, that the public deserves transparency. We deserve meaningful engagement, and we need to understand what the long-term consequences are of a decision like this for a seashore that belongs to all of us. So with that, I will step off of my soapbox and I will turn it back to Jessica and Wild Cumberland, and we'd be happy to take any questions that you have later on this evening. Thank you.
Yeah, I know the chat is very busy there. We're going to get to your questions just as quickly as we can. Just to follow what Kelly said and share her sentiments about the lack of transparency, we feel like it's important to share with this group that we also have been seeking from the agency a wilderness character baseline assessment that was completed long before 2024. We placed our request 2 years ago. That content has been sent back to us, but as you see on the screen, it was almost completely and fully redacted. That is particularly significant given that, potential wilderness and wilderness comprise more than 50% of the island. The island has been without its wilderness management plan for 44 years. And to see some of the proposals that the National Park Service has put forth, particularly within the last 5 or so years, I think is a real reflection of priorities that do not necessarily align with either the legislative intent of the park or public desires. So I think it's pretty important to point out that this information, which, one could argue the wilderness sort of helps to protect the primitive nature of the seashore, no matter where you recreate, I think is really relevant to the discussions that we're having today. And then we're almost there because it's 7:30 and we want to get to your questions. Danny has one more really important tool to share with you before we do that.
So we are in the process of uploading a really cool interactive timeline that is going to be on the Wild Cumberland website. We'll share a link to it when it goes live along with the recording of the town hall. And I'm just going to give you a quick orientation to the timeline. We wanted to pull together some seemingly disparate events that were significant to the management of the National Seashore and land ownership on the island. And so as you can see, starting from the left, moving to the right, that's, as time has progressed, from legislation that has enabled the park and ensured that the park was being managed in alignment with legislation. The Park Service has implemented plans over time, and you can kind of see this cascade over time. And right about the time that retained rights agreements started expiring, and there were a large concentration of landholding events, some litigation, some management policies and things. This is also sort of really corresponded with a lot of the Park Service's plans not being implemented. And we think that, that these are certainly related to each other. I'll also give you a quick orientation so that you can use this as a resource to understand a lot of the kind of complex information about the history of Cumberland Island National Seashore. If you click on this little eye at the top left of the timeline, it will pull up a quick description of how we categorize each of the event categories. And then if you hover your mouse over any of these buttons, like right here, you'll get a little pop-up window that tells you what that event is. And if you click on it, it'll redirect you to the source material so that you can look at that yourself and draw your own conclusions from that information.
And ultimately, this tool is a resource for all of you and for all of our partners, so that when you are ready to take the next step, you have all of the information that you need to help you prioritize your message. But what we really need are for the people who care about Cumberland Island or a special place like it, is for you to contact your congressional representative. We've seen from the lack of transparency and the prioritization and the disregard for public input that the only solution is really going to be going to our congressional representatives and letting them know that we expect more transparency, more accountability, and adherence to what Congress intended for the National Seashore. And that's not just for you and for me, but that's for future generations of Americans and those who've already made commitments and honored those over the last 50 or so years. So we're specifically asking you to go and contact your congressional offices. This is not something that is new to any of us at this point in time. And if you need tools and need support in helping with that communication, our team of volunteers is more than glad to assist. But we really need you to let your congressional offices know that the National Park Service should stop advancing and funding these exchanges until there's really more formal oversight. I think that it is also important to make clear to this group tonight that the National Park Service was invited to come and join this public town hall, and they declined to do so, citing the 2 signed agreements that they have in place. And so I'm not sure that directing any feedback to management is an effective answer, and we need to go a little bit harder and a little bit higher. So we are here to help you with that process. We also very much want to hear what concerns you about the information that Kelly and Defenders of Wildlife shared tonight. And for the sake of posterity, we covered a lot of information. There's no way that all of this makes sense to everyone. So we're going to do our best to try and answer your questions and address those, but we certainly will be following up with more communication in coming months. We do have an indication that there will be a public comment period officially happening on this project in the fall. So now's a really important time to make sure that you understand the issues and what's at stake and can start to advocate for the right type of solution.
So we're going to go ahead and open up questions. We do have several of our partners on the line in addition to Defenders of Wildlife, who will be able to answer some of the really kind of specific questions, especially any historic information about the island, prior litigation, things like that. So it would be wonderful if you could, if you do have a question and it's not in the chat, if we could start, come off mute and let us see your face if you're willing to share your camera and ask your questions.
Hi, I'm Karen. I live right downtown and I work right next door to the national park. I am most concerned about the fact that they want to go from 300 to 1,000 people over to the island on the ferry. How do you feel about that?
We certainly have concerns about the number of changes they proposed in that former visitor use management plan, which is where they proposed a significant change in visitation. I think what concerns me most about this land exchange is that, we heard loud and clear from folks, they're not going to be returning to Camden County with their dollars if the Park Service doesn't protect Cumberland Island. I think there were over 500 emails received by the Camden County Commission over a weekend when we understood that the National Park Service was seeking support by the commission. So I think it's really important to consider that people value Camden County for the protection it's provided Cumberland Island, for what that unique experience is. And I think this development would really affect any existing numbers or those that they might desire for in their plans.
And we want to point out that for both the proposed visitor use management plan and the land exchange, there are often in these processes a number of options that are presented, and they tend to be like an option of no change, an option that's a lot of changes all at once, and then often like a middle ground. And we were presented with a false dichotomy of either you accept all of these changes or you accept none of the changes. And we do acknowledge some of the points that the Park Service makes about both the visitor use management plan and the land exchange. So with the land exchange, for example, I do think it is problematic that if you go on parallel trail, you're alternating between public and private land. And I personally would love to see that all of that land was public. However, I think it is unfair to only present a solution that would lead to privatization and potentially a lot of development on the island. And so, yeah, I think increasing the visitor use very suddenly and at a time when the Park Service is being defunded and there have been a lot of reductions in force. So they're understaffed beyond what the understaffing that already existed before all of the rifts is really concerning me because that's going to damage the park and beautiful island. So thank you for your question.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, Kelly.
Kelly, can you come off mute and ask your question? Or there you are.
Me?
Yes.
Yes. Hello.
Hello.
My name is Kelly Jaser. I was an outdoor educator with Driftwood Education Center for a good number of years. My question is, having done tours on Cumberland Island, is there a way that we could petition to have Cumberland Island become either a state park or a national park?
That's a big question. I don't think that petitioning for a national park would change the management of the island, if you will, because that would still be within the purview of National Park Service and Department of Interior. And I think there has always been a great deal of historical contention related to the choice for it to be a federally managed property. I do think that the federal aspects of this park reinforce the importance to all Americans and why we should really use a great deal of thought and restraint when we consider making decisions that would affect, what's increasingly a more endangered ecosystem, frankly. So I'm not sure that there is an answer specifically in either of those two things, but it is important to point out that the state of Georgia has tools, including its coastal zone management program and other things to help ensure that our federal land managers are also considering state priorities and state responsibilities. In fact, on Cumberland, there's this weird thing called concurrent jurisdiction, which is that the state and the feds sort of meet in the middle, and there's an area where they sort of share responsibility for the boundary of the park and what happens in the park and the state waters. And it's important to point out that the National Park Service did seek a letter of support from the state of Georgia moving forward for this plan, and Governor Brian Kemp's office authorized that letter of support through the Department of Coastal Natural Resources in March of this year. So
and that was not disclosed to the public. So there's a degree of transparency that we're striving for that is not necessarily going to be solved with state management.
I just remember teaching the kids years ago that 80% of the nation's wetlands on the East Coast are in Georgia. So it's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and you may remember Cumberland Island, for some of you may not know that it was actually designated an international biosphere reserve as a reflection for its incredible biodiversity. I mean, it really is a globally significant place that the National Park Service, the Department of Interior, and the state of Georgia are responsible for stewarding for our planet. And I think it's a lot of responsibility, and it's certainly complicated, but I think that it's really important Georgians in particular speak up and let folks know that they expect better stewardship out of all of those agencies.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Debbie Glidden.
Hi, Debbie.
The other side obviously has probably a few good attorneys, and I don't think we're going to get where we need to go if we have 60, 80, 100 of us with our ideas. We need a leader, maybe a Southern Environmental Law Center. We need somebody leading this charge that we can follow behind. And so I hope you will consider that. They're a nonprofit they're a law firm that only works with nonprofits devoted to the environment.
Yep. And we're happy to say that we are, in fact, working with SELC, and they've been an excellent partner on all of these things and navigate. There we go. Great.
But if there is anybody, I mean, and as Danny mentioned, they're a partner included that we work with closely. But if there's anybody here from the Southern Environmental Law Center who might be in attendance and want to speak, I want to make sure we offer that opportunity. I don't think they were able to join us tonight, but just want to make sure.
It would be helpful to have some bullet points that we all could be in concert about, so that you've got, to pick a number, half a dozen bullet points and who we should send them to, rather than lots of interesting observations and thoughts and concerns. That we need action, not just thoughts. So thank you for all of this tonight.
Yeah. And thank you for joining and being willing to take action. That is a very challenging thing to ask people to do oftentimes. And we are going to be sending out action alerts that have very clear language that you can standardize for yourself to reach out to your congressional representatives. And I will also just share anecdotally that that your representatives listen when you reach out, and they often will keep account of how many times they've been contacted about the same issue, and that will help compel them to pay attention, to take action. And we've had some really great support from Georgia's Senate offices in the past, and they've helped us get extensions on public comment periods, we're actively having conversations with the coastal representatives and senators now about this issue. And so we definitely want to follow up and have people follow up with their representatives to let them know that this matter is concerning to you. So, and we suggest using this sort of template of sort of bullet points to address your concerns, but we will also have resources on our website, and we'll be sharing those with all of you.
Yeah. And I know there may be some other folks who are willing to come off mute and would like to ask their question, but I want to acknowledge that there are a lot sort of bubbling in the chat, and I have a few of those here. So just to kind of maybe offer a little bit of detail, I was asked specifically, or we were asked, if Lumar LLC is an owner of any of the private parcels. Yes, Exchange 4 has to do with the Lumar parcel and High Point. And so we'd be happy to discuss those details with you if that's helpful.
We also, I think we might have Dave Kyler from the Center for Sustainable Coast on, or potentially John Shorts. They were involved in the litigation. John or Dave, are you, either of you, on and would be willing to talk about Lumar?
Okay. I think there were some connectivity issues down on the coast for some of our friends tonight. So, yeah. But I think that the Lumar parcel in many ways is sort of where this entire thing originated. And if you are familiar with the seashore history, the development of that dock and the rezoning steps that you may be familiar with sort of happened sequentially from that action. So I think that the Lumar dock is an important piece of this. I think it was 2016. I mean, it's been 10 years that this has sort of all been hanging out there. And this is not really the solution I think that the public expected the Park Service to deliver for that situation.
And the Lumar litigation is a little bit concerning to us because we don't want to see history repeat itself, and we'd like to ensure that any of the future plans for the seashore are in line with legislative intent. It is actionable to litigate should we have a case that that legislation is being violated in the development. But like the Lumar dock case shows, that if private residences are built or they're already fairly into construction, it is entirely possible that they'll be permitted to be finished because the progress has already started. They've already clear cut the land and started developing the infrastructure to support the residents. So ideally, we stop any development from occurring before
it happens.
Yeah.
And then there's another question that was about a timeline. Again, the superintendent gave us indication that there would be a public comment opportunity happening for this project in the fall. So until we have more information from the National Park Service, that is the best timeline that we can offer, which is we'll be waiting to hear more information when they make it available.
Does anybody have other questions or concerns they'd like to share?
Yeah, I have a question. Hey, my name is Justin Cape. For y'all that don't know me, I run an Instagram account called Outdoors with Cape. I'm curious, do we know how much money the National Park Service has spent on this proposal so far? And if we do we know what that money was spent on?
I cannot affirmatively or definitively answer that question. I think it's a great question to go to your congressional representative about. That information has not been disclosed to the public.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for your question. Certainly relevant. Is there anybody else who would like to come off mute? I know Danny's scrolling through chat to make sure that we sort of address some of the more pressing questions.
If I may?
Yes, sure, please.
My name's Todd Wilson. I've been visiting Cumberland since 1987 and annually since 90. One thing that's concerning me is they've got another boil water advisory going on. I know before they blamed it on the wildfires and the drought, but that's mildly concerning. But the development, that dock that Lumar put up, I think that the Coastal Resources Division of the DNR gave them the go-ahead to build that dock, if I remember properly, because I remember seeing it being built. And it's, I get it, to get that land, to get that belt into public hands would be superior to their initial plan, which was 11 townhouses in basically a belt 1/4 mile north of Sea Camp.
Yeah, the permitting process for that, and I wish, I think Dave from the Center for Sustainable Coast is with us, but he had to call in, so he can't speak quite the way he would if he were fully in the Zoom. That permitting process was highly contentious. The Army Corps of Engineers, the Department of Natural Resources, and even the National Park Service all had a hand in the permit that allowed that dock. And for those of you unfamiliar, if you ever have disembarked at the Sea Camp Ferry and you look north, you can see that dock visibly from where you disembark. But you're right, that is an example of development that was initiated without proper oversight and remains today. It cannot be undone. So again, stressing the need for us to ensure that our congressional representatives execute the authority they have as in oversight and ensure that the Park Service really is complying with the legislative intent that was set in 1972 and subsequently in 1982 with the wilderness designation.
Yeah, this is Tom Canning. May I speak for a second?
Please. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I live in St. Mary's. and the history we've gone over, how the dock got built, and actually, I think it's well documented that not all the authorities gave the appropriate approvals, but it went on anyway. But that's not the point of my question. My question is very simple. Are there any state or federal elected officials that have stood up on this subject and are involved with protecting Cumberland Island? If there are, I certainly would like to know who they are so we can communicate with them directly. Thank you.
Do you want to?
I'll let you.
Well, I first want to acknowledge that 3 of the 5 Camden County commissioners voted against issuing a letter of support for the land exchange, and that's public record. You can look at the notes and the video recording of that meeting that occurred on March 17th. So I think those are folks that, especially if you want to reach out to them and say thank you for supporting a transparent process for the land exchange. That was, they really cited 2 issues, which is that they received so much public outcry about the issue, 500 comments in 5 days, and then that the plan lacks transparency that is necessary to really weigh in on whether they could support the plan.
Okay, let me ask the question again, please, because I am fully aware of the position taken and the action and inaction of our Camden County commissioners. That's not my question.
Okay.
My question is, because they've obviously been ineffective up to this point. Matter of fact, years ago when Lumar submitted their hardship variance to get a road put in so they could subdivide their 90 acres, they couldn't resolve that in-house, so they passed it over to the Park Service. But you know all of that stuff. And that's where we are today. I mean, one iteration or another. There's been petitions that we've signed and submitted. My question is, again, are there any state or federal elected officials that have gone on record that are aware of what's going on, who would be our prime point of contact to try to leverage their position to resolve these situations in the public interest? Thank you.
Not on record, no.
Not on record. We're trying to build those advocates. We're actually asking all of you on here to contact your representatives and help us find those advocates who will stand up for the seashore on record.
Hey, excuse my frustration, but we've been doing that, and I believe you may or may not recognize my name, but we have a number of people online here that have been involved for a number of years, and frustration is certainly a mild word.
Yes.
When it comes to public action and public attention with 0 results. So that's the reason why I was hoping that your organization was aware of people who have depth and scope to make a difference but obviously the answer is no. Thank you.
Not yet. The answer is not yet. And we share your frustration.
If you do get a list of names, please make it public. But writing to the county commissioners, as much as I respect what the job they do and how hard they have to work, their impact on this subject is, other than the fact that they didn't sign the letter, which bravo Zulu to them, they're just going to be faced with the final decision so they can rezone the property to accommodate.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Matthew.
Jess.
Oh.
Jess, I'm off mute now.
Oh, hi, Dave.
Hey.
Dave Kyler, Sustainable Coast. I wanted to clarify something that apparently some of the participants in the meeting are not aware of regarding that Lumar dock permit. The way it worked, or the way it failed to work in allowing the permit, apparently, it's our understanding, our assertion, that under the federal law, any permit for such a facility within the boundaries of the National Seashore should have had a hearing. Instead, the Corps treated that dock as it would any dock outside the National Seashore under a regional or national programmatic permit for single-family docks, since it was applied for as if to be used only for one structure, which was, I think, somewhat, if not blatantly, deceptively portrayed as a caretaker facility. Anyway, so the dock was approved without a hearing, and part of that approval included a procedure used by the Coastal Resources Division of DNR, which requires the adjacent property owner, that in this case the National Park Service, to sign off on with no objection to the proposed action of the permit applicant, in this case the Candler people who owned the parcel served by the dock and who were applicants for the dock. And Gary Ingram, the superintendent of the island.
Let's get this, Matthew, and then maybe one more question, and then tell folks we'll
without
do it
any
after.
coordination or
we had to get Dave.
notification with anyone, signed off on that, having no objections to the dock being applied for by the Candler people. So that measure was dubious, as was the Corps' handling of the permit under the programmatic permit for as if it were a single-family dock anywhere.
Right.
But all that steamrolled in federal court after several appeals, and ultimately they let the Corps have its way. And all the information about the subdivision, which was subsequently applied for by Candlers, was much short, you might say outrage, was not allowed to be a record of our appeal because it was not information available at the time the original permit was issued. It was not part of the, quote, record of decision. So the deceptive application for a single-family dock, which itself was not handled properly, even if it were a single-family dock, was then later further aggravated by Candler seeking a subdivision for 10 lots, each using the dock, which made the dock, which, if it had been applied for originally, would have disqualified the dock for a regional programmatic permit without a hearing anywhere.
Right.
So it was just a series of outrageous breaches by all concerned that was never recognized as such by the federal court.
And we thank the center for its valiant attempts to try and rectify that. I will say we really appreciate you. We've probably got time for maybe one more question from the chat and a couple hands that maybe are raised. So, and then I want to be clear that anything we didn't address tonight, we will comb back through the chat. We will comb back through the discussion and make sure that we're addressing those questions as best we can going forward. So, Matthew, I think you've had your hand up for a few minutes if you'd like to ask your question.
Yes, ma'am. So my name's Matthew Rigdon. I've lived in Coastal Georgia all my life. I just had a question about Exchange 4 here. So in the original 2024 proposal, it said with the private acquisition in the High Point Half Moon Bluff Historic District that there was archaeological and historic surveys going on, and that, maybe if they were conclusive, there would be a conservation easement to identify areas of concern for cultural and, I'm just reading it right off the thing. I would like to know, has there been any update as if, have they been conclusive? Has the National Park Service updated anything about that at all? No. I figured not, but I was just wondering, it's been 2 years, so I kind of assumed maybe they would have, said they found something or not.
Yeah, at the March 17th meeting, they presented the exact same material that was already available to the public. And, something notable about the FOIA documents that defenders were issued shows that they've clearly been making progress on these plans, and that they were not reflected in any way in the public-facing documents.
Okay. Thank y'all for answering my question.
Of course.
Yes, thanks
for asking.
Okay.
Okay. There were some questions in chat. Let's see. I'm going to try to see if we can answer one or two more of them before we go. And then let's see. David asked, isn't the more common approach to simply allow for some form of life estate at the time these seashores are established, and then that's it? I seem to recall issue with folks trying to stay longer than originally agreed at Apostle Islands. If they're adding residences, that seems like an attempt to gain or get an incredibly valuable real estate with undeveloped land around them in perpetuity at public expense. I think that is an exceptionally accurate characterization of what has happened here. In fact, at Cumberland Island, some of these life estates and retained right agreements, as we discussed, were for decades longer than are typically associated with these agreements at other national park sites and seashores. So I think that is an exceptionally valid concern, and it is well documented. There are a number of books we can recommend if you are interested in diving into the history, particularly of some of those parcels that have already been purchased by the federal government in one form or fashion.
And I also really quickly want to address a question about whether the 2 of the 4 land exchanges are a done deal. That none of the land exchanges are a done deal. They still have many steps that they still have to go through, and there's still going to be some negotiations. Whatever plans they have right now are not probably going to be exactly what would be finalized if they were able to finalize the land exchanges. And to be clear, the Park Service has informed us in direct communication that the next step and when you should expect an update, a public update about this is going to be in the fall of this year, and they will release an environmental assessment, and that should theoretically include any relevant cultural or ecological findings from their assessments, and we hope valuations, we hope parcels, the number of acreage in the exchanges, and other details, the most up-to-date maps of the parcels being exchanged, et cetera. But we just don't know what they're going to include in the EA. So definitely, if you're not already following us and you don't want to constantly be checking the National Park Service website, please follow Wild Cumberland on Instagram or Facebook, and look out for the update whenever the Park Service releases the environmental assessment. We'll obviously be keeping the public informed, and intend to have another town hall and an opportunity for you to ask questions about the newest iteration of the land exchange.
Yeah, and for those of you not on social media,
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask something quick too. Also, planes. What kind of plane access are they allowed? Like, there's already planes on the Stafford, and the other one is about the financial. It looked like it was a losing financial deal for the national park, where they got fewer acres, and wasn't there something they also had to pay some money or something? It just looks like a ripoff of the public. So if you have a chance just to say something on the financial part.
Well, I'll try to address both questions. One is that neither the High Point nor the Stafford airstrip ownership and use has been reflected in any plan that the agency has put forward. And so there are 2 active private airstrips on the island currently in operation, and we have no indication that ownership or use would change at this point in time. And then, I'm sorry, the second part was finances, right?
Yeah, so we don't know. It's a really good question that we would love to know more about, because there's no information about valuation or acreage of the land that would be given away. So presumably, based on the attempted application of land and water conservation funds, a federal funding source, that would suggest that potentially it's not an equal exchange, and that they would need to acquire additional funds in order to create, basically to fill in the gap. So we don't know, and it's a very good question, and we're doing our best to try to get some of that information from the Park Service.
Also, I noticed that in the chat, a couple of folks have asked for the names of the families associated with this. We've tried to be respectful, as you've seen with how we share this information, but I'll remind everybody on this call that the Camden County Tax Property Map or database is open and public, and you can see any privately owned parcels that still exist on Cumberland Island for yourselves in the event that you're interested in pursuing some of those details further. But I'm happy to further discuss any of the nuance associated with what we've tried to cover gracefully in this hour and a half at a future time and date. So you can expect to hear more communication from us. For those of you not on social media, please sign up for our email newsletter. We do make sure that our email list receives all of the most important information first. So in the event that you want to follow this issue and continue to stay engaged, you can expect that Wild Cumberland and Defenders of Wildlife will continue to keep you informed about what's happening and provide opportunities for you to engage and help protect one of what is really one of the world's most incredible places, and that we Georgians are fortunate enough to have here in our home state. So I want to thank Kelly especially for the hard work that Defenders of Wildlife put into getting these documents and helping to interpret them for the public. I realize that there are more questions and unanswered questions than any of us would like. So I hope that tonight has been somewhat useful for you. Please do feel free. I'm Jessica at wildcumberland.org. You can reach out to me anytime. I will do my best to try and find you the resources or information that might help. So really thank you to all of our partners and to all of you for such thoughtful and important questions. Kelly, would you like to say anything else before we sort of, I know we've gone way over. It's almost 8:30.
Yeah. I'm so grateful to you all for your participation and your involvement. It's so meaningful, and I encourage you all to stay involved. We'll need this energy as we enter into the fall and approach this public comment period. So thank you all, and appreciate you, and have a good evening.
Thanks
so much.
Thanks, everybody.